to spare. Nothing now remains of Hitler's headquarters. Allied bombing and Soviet occupation forces destroyed all traces of the Chancellery. Today, offices and apartments stand in its place. Berlin historian Tony Letizier takes us to the site of Hitler's former power base.
We're walking westward along Vossstrasse, and we've just come to a bend in the road. It's from this point onwards extended Hitler's new Third Reich Chancellery, which was opened in January 1939, having taken only 1 year to construct.
To celebrate the Chancellery's opening, Hitler hosted a dinner for foreign ambassadors and VIPs. Guests were met by an extraordinary sight. In a stunning reception room, 17-foot-high doors opened onto a hall decorated with mosaics. But this was not the building's most lavish feature.
From the end of this building to the next building we come to was the center section of Hitler's Reichschancellery. This gallery which confronted it was based on the idea of the Hall of Mirrors at Versailles, but Hitler wanted it bigger and better, so it was nearly 500 feet long.
Hitler insisted the floors were always kept highly polished. The focal point of the building was Hitler's office, adorned in red leather and swastikas. The whole building was designed to exude Hitler's power, to be a fitting headquarters from where he could preside over the German Reich. Although none of it survives today, 3D technology shows how the finished Chancellery once looked. Although as the administrative center, it was the most important of the buildings in Germania, the intention was to fill the city with other, far more impressive structures. And the man responsible was Albert Speer. Now one of Hitler's most trusted aides and promoted to the position of armaments minister, he found himself presented with even greater challenges. Hitler's ambition was only increasing, and the development of his vision for Germania reflects that. On a visit to Paris, he had greatly admired the city's neoclassical monuments. He particularly liked the Arc de Triomphe and wanted one for himself. His triumphal arch, however, would be twice as high and 4 times wider than the one in Paris, and would grace the center of his city. It would weigh 2.5 million tons, 25 times more than the Arc de Triomphe. This was the part of the design that most worried Speer. Berlin, what was to be Germania, was built on swampland. In the center of Berlin, his solution still stands: the derelict remains of an experiment to see whether Hitler's arch would simply sink into the ground. Massive blocks of concrete and steel were erected here, where the arch was meant to stand. Known as the GBK, German for load-bearing body, they exerted a pressure of around 11,000 pounds per square foot. Architect Michael Richter investigates the test site.
We are standing in front of the GBK, the Großbelastungskörper, and attempt to see if the triumphal arch planned by Adolf Hitler could have stood.
Speer's engineers worked to a simple formula. If the block sank no more than 2.5 inches, it was safe to build the arch. Inside lies the forgotten chamber where the experiment was monitored.
We are now entering the upper measuring chamber. Here is where the actual measurements in the GBK were carried out. And from this upper chamber, it goes even deeper into a further room.
Deep inside the GBK lies a hidden shaft. Below this hatch are testing rooms used by Speer's engineers.
This is the central shaft that runs across 3 levels. It's 30 feet deep. And at the end, there are 4 chambers where the measuring devices used to be.
The chambers below contained pressure gauges to monitor the GBK's sinkage rates. Engineers monitored the tower's subsidence visually.
Here on this pillar, there stood an optical measuring device that was aimed at a point outside the GBK through this pipe, comparing the height of the object outside with this water level indicator in the upper measuring chamber to determine the sinkage of the GBK.
The experiment proved the Berlin soil was too unstable for the arch.
The attempt here showed that it would have been impossible to build the triumphal arch without fortifying the ground. The GBK sank by more than 7 inches between 1941 and 1944.
Still, Hitler would not accept his arch could not be built and ordered Speer to continue looking for a solution. The GBK is still sinking today. Although Hitler's engineers continued with their work, the arch was never built. By investigating the plans and using state-of-the-art technology, we can reveal how it would have looked. Hitler and Speer were not deterred by this failure. They set about their next project, the biggest of all Germania's buildings, the Great Hall. It would be the city's centerpiece, crowned with a dome so big, some said it would have its own clouds and rainfall. Its design would test the bounds of what was possible in construction, and it would demand the ruthless brutality which had become the Nazis' hallmark. It would be built using slave labor. In 1936, Adolf Hitler unveiled plans for the most ambitious of all his building projects, a vast domed space called the Great Hall.
The Great Hall was the absolute focal point of the north-south axis. It was a gigantic building which had by far the largest dome in the world at the time.
It was intended to be the most important of all Germania's buildings, a symbol of greatness. It was to be Hitler's engineering masterpiece. Land was cleared, workers hired, digging began. Unlike most of Germania's buildings, which were designed by architects, the Great Hall was designed by Hitler himself. He looked to one of antiquity's most famous monuments, the Pantheon in Rome. He'd seen it in 1938 and was deeply impressed, but his hall would be bigger.
What's really important to remember is that the scale is so much more gargantuan in the Great Hall. The Pantheon was already a large dome space, but the Great Hall was so much bigger.
Engineer Ed McCann assesses the plans for the Great Hall.
This isn't just 2 or 3 times bigger than the Pantheon. This is 8 times as wide as the Pantheon, 2.5 times the length of a football pitch. You could fit 2 Saturn V rockets in there and still fly around the top in a small helicopter. This is just an enormous space, and nothing like it had been done before then, and in fact nothing like it's been done since.
The Great Hall was to symbolize Hitler's mastery of the world. At its highest point would stand an imperial eagle. It would hold in its claws not the usual swastika, but the globe. The dome represented the vault of the sky spanning Hitler's global empire. The interior would mimic that of the Pantheon. In the main wall, a large niche would contain a 78-foot statue of the imperial eagle, perched over a pulpit. 3 tiers of seats would surround a central arena. Around these, 100 pillars, 3 stories high, would reach to the coffered ceiling. The building was intended to hold up to 180,000 people. Above them would be a roof that rose almost 1,000 feet. And the intention was to build it all from granite. Could Speer have built a structure of such colossal dimensions? Engineer Ed McCann has made calculations based on the existing blueprints.
This dome would have weighed in excess of 200,000 tons. That's about, 500 fully laden jumbo jets. And in order to see whether he was even vaguely right, we took his drawings and our understanding of what he tried to do and bunged it into one of our modern structural engineering packages. Rather to our surprise, found out that it could more or less be made to work as he imagined it.
Even though technically possible, the sheer scale of the building would have been problematic.